everybody and welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing another synth replica, and this time I'll be making the Moog grandmother. It has a lot of interesting functionality and I'm sure it'll be a great brain exercise to try to implement all of those functions in Patcher. I'll start by looking for some clues on the synth's manual and maybe look for some videos where I can actually see how this synth works and what it sounds like, because I don't own this synth, so I need to get some kind of a general sense on what it sounds like. And if there's something that can't quite be recreated in Patcher, then I'm just gonna figure out some alternative functionality to replace it, but I'm gonna try my best. If you want to see the previous video where I recreated the TR-808, I'm gonna put a link somewhere or in the description so you can watch that too. And like the TR-808, I'm gonna give this as a free download as well, so there's a link in the description for that too. I recommend to download it now so you can kind of follow this video and look into the patch yourself. So let's come up with a plan. I have located the manual, and here we have the first very useful thing, which is the block diagram. So to anybody who is not familiar with electronics, a block diagram is a type of a diagram that illustrates the basic functionality of a circuit represented in these blocks. So like, for example, here we have the mixer block, so it doesn't show individual components like resistors and capacitors. It's more to get a general sense of where the signal flows. So looking at this diagram is a good opportunity for me to already start thinking about the implementation in Patcher. So the audio signal is generated here in the oscillators 1 and 2, and these switches right here represent the waveform switching. And from here the audio signal continues, and here we have like a wave out. So in the grandmother you can directly get the wave out like straight from the oscillator. But next it's going to the mixer, and like these things, these little switch looking things represent the inputs and outputs for the patching. After the mixer it's going to the filter and then the VCA, and over here is the utilities panel. This is like separate from everything else. So the Moog grandmother is a semi-modular synthesizer, which means that there is signal flow without any patching. So it's gonna go, like I just explained, from the oscillators to the mixer and the filter and so on and so forth. But you can introduce patching to make more interesting sound design, and then I believe you can even use some of these modules as kind of standalone effects, I guess. So you could connect like external synthesizers and other modules. And then we have the modulation section. So here's the modulation oscillator, which generates the control signal. So the modulation panel is essentially an LFO, and here's the Arpeggiator. So after all this research, I made some general decisions on how to proceed. So I'm thinking of having one citrus per oscillator, so 2 citruses, and the waveform selections are going to be citrus operators set to all these different waveforms, and then you just kind of turn off the volume and turn up the volume based on which one is selected, and this is going to be some kind of a formula controller setup, most likely. And the modulation is going to be done with peak controller because it has this waveform selection menu by default, so that's going to be easy to hook up onto a knob. But the only thing that it doesn't have in the menu is the inverted saw, but we can come up with some kind of a workaround with formula controller. And the modularity is gonna be probably the most difficult one to figure out, because I was thinking of some kind of a modulation matrix, but then I thought that it'll quickly become insanely complicated in the map side, because it might have like hundreds of connections. I might make some kind of a simplified solution where you can connect some of the most useful modules together, but I think that this is one of those things that it'll be easy to figure out once I've actually made all this other functionality and I can see it in front of me, so it'll be easier to kind of see what is the best or most efficient solution. But yeah, now that I've gotten familiar with the synth and come up with this plan, we can start adding stuff into Patcher. I was supposed to update my FL Studio before starting this project, but too lazy to do it now, so I'm just gonna go with my old version. I think that the first thing that I want to do is try to recreate the basic waveforms, because the Citrus default waveforms are not gonna sound the same as the grandmother's waveforms. I have this waveform pack called AKWF, which is a pack of single cycle waveforms, and there's like a lot of options. So in here you can sometimes find these kind of analog sounding waves, so I'm just gonna look through this real quick. I'll open up a wave candy as well so I can look. And now I'm gonna go into the Oscillator tab of Citrus, and I can actually edit some of the harmonics. The top part is the harmonic magnitude, and the bottom part is the harmonic phase. So I can adjust both of them on a one harmonic basis. So I might just take some of these higher ones off completely to try to round the tips. This is just a little bit louder. How many operators do I need? The triangle needs one. The sawtooth needs one. But like, here's the thing, you can adjust the pulse width, but I don't know if you can adjust the pulse width of both of the, like the 50% duty cycle square and the like narrower square. So the last one is the pulse wave, and here I'm gonna use this very interesting technique where I make the pulse wave out of two opposite phase saw waves, and by doing this I can also make the pulse width adjustment that is in the modulation panel so that you can change the pulse width in real time. When we add two saw waves that are out of phase and flipped, it's going to result in a square wave. And when we adjust the phase of the oscillator 2 here, we can adjust the pulse width, like so. So I think we have the basic waveforms done. So I'm going to name this oscillator 1, and then I'm going to duplicate it and name this oscillator 2. And while I'm at it, I'm probably gonna make the noise as its own Citrus instance. So the octave adjustments are gonna be, they're gonna have 4 values. So from 0 to 3. And I'm also gonna make the move speed 1, because otherwise it's just gonna like fly to the other end instantly. Here we have octave 1 and octave 2. So now I've connected those. So let's see if it works. Oh, whoops. It's wrong. It needs to be... This needs to be 4 after all. And the next thing that I could do is to connect the keyboard. So that needs to be connected to both of these. Like so. I can make an output volume. Just a fruity balance. Next, I could actually connect the oscillators to the mixer, oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 knobs. Connect them just to the master volume fader. Let's make the waveform selector. The waveform. I think we need to activate all of these. And we need to remember that operator 4 and 5 are meant to be together because they form the pulse wave sound together. And the way that I'm gonna do this is that I'm gonna assign this range using the formula controller. So assign a specific range for each of these options. So in order for triangle wave volume to go to full, it needs to be at 0%, like this knob. And then in order to saw wave volume to go to full, it needs to be at 25%. and for square 50%, and so on and so forth. So this is like a way how you can do these selectors, and you can have a lot of options when you just kind of divide the range of the knob, like from 0 to 100. Does it work? So we have a triangle, and a saw, and a square, and a pulse. So now we just need to do the same thing for the second oscillator. These formula controller things are different than in the first example because this knob also has the negative side. So if this knob would just go to 0%, there would still be sound because this is like a two-way knob. I don't know what to call it, bidirectional knob, something like that. So this is why I needed to do this case statement, because by doing this, I can specify that it'll jump to 0.5, which in that type of a knob is the actual 0. So the next thing for the oscillators is going to be the sync function. And I'm gonna do a demonstration on that as well. So first I'm gonna go to the manual and see what it says about the sync function. So here is a description, and it says that when this button is lit, the phase of oscillator 2 is hard synced to the phase of oscillator 1. This will cause oscillator 2 to reset at each 0 crossing of oscillator 1. So here is like an example. So this will cause it to sound like it has the same bass frequency as oscillator 1. So it just kind of sounds like the overtones are changing. So here's a pretty good demonstration on what it sounds like. So I ran into this problem of running out of modulation controls. So I need an extra pitch knob for the second oscillator because it has that frequency setting. So here I have an example. I have this pitch LFO, and over here in this menu it needs to be set into frozen LFO, and the bipolar LFO tension option needs to be turned off. So now when I move the tension knob, I can adjust the pitch. And here I have this setup. So oscillator 1 is a saw wave, and oscillator 2 is also a saw wave, and this time they're in the same direction. Here the second saw wave is not flipped like in the previous example where we made a square wave out of that. Let's try to see what happens. And now when I start to adjust the phase of oscillator 2, we get this effect that really does look kind of the same as this one. So yeah, let me know if I'm wrong on this, but I think that this is how it works. And the output is a saw wave, but it's like up 1 octave. So it's almost as if the frequency is changing when we in reality adjust the phase of the second oscillator. So how do we implement this in our patch design? Citrus's FM is actually phase modulation, so I think that there should be a way to make this happen by using the matrix here, because then I guess I could turn operator 6 into this sync oscillator, because right now in my patch I have operators 1 to 5 in use, but then in the oscillator 2 in the patch I could enable operator 6 and use that as the sync oscillator to create this, and hopefully then it wouldn't matter which waveform I have, it would just like work the same basically. So over here I have another example where I tried to do this with the modulation matrix of Citrus. I have this setup, so I have operator 1, that has just a regular saw wave. And then in operator 2, I have this like halfway saw, and then the phase is turned to the opposite direction. And this results in this type of behavior when I adjust the volume. Yeah, it does sound the same, so... And now I guess I could change whatever kind of waveform here that I wanted. So this is gonna be our sync oscillator. I'm gonna set this to a saw, and the way that you get that kind of like a halfway saw is by pressing this button over here. I need to connect that into the sync button. So, and I'm probably gonna need a formula controller because wait, how does this have to work? So when this is pressed, this needs to turn into adjusting the volume of this one. Okay, so with a case statement, I was able to do this functionality. So now when the button is not pressed, the balance knob is movable, and then when it's pressed, it's no longer movable. But then we have to take into account the two-way volume knob again. But let's just try to make this work. So let's do the inverse for this one. Case. When button is pressed, we're controlling the volume side. And when button is not pressed, we're controlling the balance side. So now with this one, we can select which parameter a knob is going to control. But now the problem is that we need to be able to reset these into specific values. So now when I press the button, the balance is just going to go to 100%. And when the button is not pressed, the volume is just going to jump into 100%. So what we basically want is to determine where these knobs are going to go. So how do we do that? So I want them always to go to 0.5. Okay, so button is pressed. Balance will go to halfway through. And volume is adjustable, and when button is not pressed, volume is going to go to halfway through, and balance is adjustable. It is exactly what we wanted. Now I'm just going to transfer that technique in my patch. The oscillator section is pretty much done now. Okay, let's just check everything. So... And then oscillator 2, octave works, and the frequency knob. Works, and it resets at 50%. And then let's try the sync function. Okay, so I managed to make this knob a little bit smoother using the XYZ controller. So in here, I've just enabled the X and Y inputs and outputs. And then you can adjust this acceleration value, which makes it, you know, move a little bit smoother. So it doesn't sound steppy. I'm gonna take sync off. And here's sync on. Pretty smooth. Okay, so now that I have done the mixer and the oscillators, I'm gonna move on to the modulation. So this is gonna be done using the peak controller like I mentioned earlier, because I feel like it's fairly easy solution because there's gonna be a lot of different things controlled by this modulation thing. So the first thing that I could connect is this menu. Let's say that we want to modulate the pitch of citrus. So I have modulation X enabled and I've linked the pitch in there, so like that. And I want to modulate the pitch, like make a vibrato, for example. And I have the peak controller here, and I've enabled the output. So now if I connect this to Citrus, what happens is this. So the problem with this is that the pitch doesn't stay consistent. So it's like it just starts from the bottom. So this is not a bipolar adjustment. So a bipolar would be similar to the envelope controller or all the FO envelopes in general. So here we can see that when I adjust the LFO, it'll start from the center. So it has like a negative side and a positive side. So what if we want to use Fruity Peak Controller specifically and change it into this type of behavior? We can do this using the formula controller. So, and here we have this formula where A is the bass level. So in A, we have our LFO. So now if I turn that up, we can see that A is moving. And then B is the range. So now when I adjust this, this is what happens. And this is what it sounds like. We have the change happening on both the negative and the positive sides. So the vibrato sounds like it's in tune, at least in the beginning. So I've connected some of this stuff now. So here I have my LFOs. I have separate instances for the pitch modulation and the cutoff modulation and the pulse width modulation, because in the Surface they all have their own amount adjustment knobs, so they need their own peak controllers. And then I have the bipolar convert. One thing to note about the peak controller is that it's constantly running, like this curve is constantly moving. I need to make sure that the bass values are set. So yeah, you can see that it's constantly moving, so it doesn't start when you strike a note, which can be undesired behavior for somebody, but I don't know if I care about that, like whether or not it's like the LFO starts when the note is hit, or whether it's continuously playing their curve in the background. At this point, I think I want to try to make the spring reverb. So some of you may know this already, but a spring reverb is like an actual physical spring. So inside the grandmother, there is an actual spring that causes the reverb. I think we need an audio demo so that we can listen to it, and I think that we can probably recreate something that is close enough with just the Fruity reverb and some stock plugins. Let's do the envelope. For that, I'm gonna use envelope controller. Let's check the manual on what the envelope actually does without patching. Like, does it control the filter? I added the arpeggiator. So here in Citrus, I've routed everything through filter 2, and here I have the arpeggiator. So this is like a pattern or a loop. So you have this loop start label here, and these arrows mean which way the arpeggiator is arpeggiating. So the way that you create this is click this arrow and then just select create sequence. So it'll automatically create this type of a pattern. I'm just gonna show you the window. So here you can select which way it's going or how the arpeggiator is behaving, and there's all these other types of adjustments. Originally, I thought that I could have made the arpeggiator with the envelope controller or the VFX envelope because it has the arpeggiate function, or it has that create sequence, but it doesn't have, you know, the directions and stuff, so it'll just arpeggiate chords as kind of like as one note, so it doesn't create the actual sequence of notes, like individual notes. It'll just arpeggiate the entire chord as if it's only one note. So I'm just first gonna show what it sounds like without the arpeggiator selected. I have the FM enabled. So I thought that I'd also add FM because you can do these like FM sounds in the real grandmother, but I enabled it only for Oscillator 1 because in Oscillator 1 I have the operator 6 free, so I'm just gonna put like a sine wave there, and that's gonna be the FM. So yeah, basically some of the attributes about the arpeggiator are going to be adjusted directly inside Citrus because there's really no way to link it into the surface. So if I wanted to change the order of this arpeggio, like the only thing would be to actually make copies of Citrus with different settings, but that's just kind of, I don't want this patch to be huge. You can change the arpeggiator by using this sequence editor thing. Hello, I am back and I have finally finished this project. So I took some time off because I was getting super annoyed at this and kind of bored, to be honest. So yeah, I took a break and now I finished it. And I also made this black skin for it, just like for the original. So this is like the normal version and this is the black version, just like the real Moog grandmother. Okay, so this is where it's at right now. So I'm gonna enable, like I replaced some of these modular inputs with just like switches, so now you can easily enable and disable oscillators 1 or 2 by using these buttons. And you can enable the volume envelope separately. And you can add a longer release. And here in the modulation tab, you can FM oscillator 1. So I had this spare operator in this like first Citrus, the operator 6, so I made that into the FM option for oscillator 1. You can change the pitch. And if you want to edit the FM operator, you can just go into this first Citrus labeled oscillator 1 and then into the operator 6 tab, and here you can change this shape to be whatever you want. It wasn't even a sign, it's kind of like this triangle slash a saw, but yeah, you can, like this is where you can adjust it if you want to. Okay, so I'm gonna showcase the arpeggiator. I'm just gonna reset this. I've put some reset values in here, so by resetting this, you can get rid of the FM because otherwise it's kind of difficult to place it exactly on the spot where there's no FM, so just reset it and it'll be okay. By default, this just arpeggiates upwards with even length notes like this. And here you can adjust the rate. So this arpeggiator works with the Citrus envelope arpeggiate or create sequence option. So in here, in filter 2, like filter 2 is basically the arpeggiator in this setup. So here you can see we have this weird looking green background envelope thingy, and in this menu when you click create sequence you can make this kind of an arpeggiating loop in Citrus. So if you ever need like arpeggiators in Citrus, like you can use the internal arpeggiator right here, but then you can also make it in the envelope. So if you want to change the direction of the arpeggiator or do any other types of adjustments, you can do it here. So you have to do it directly in Citrus because there's really no good way to add any of these options into the surface without making like duplicate instances of Citrus, I guess. But anyways, so if you want to change the direction, you could click create sequence, and in here you can change like the orientation of the notes and all this kind of stuff. So just mess around with this one, like maybe make a duplicate version of this patch and then just mess with this one. And then if you want to change the arpeggiator to be the same way in like oscillator 1 and 2, then you can just click on this menu and select copy state, so you can easily paste this exact same thing into other places. And the arpeggiator by default only arpeggiates the volume, so if you want to enable the cutoff, you have to do it so manually, so you can just enable this one and then adjust it. So over here I have this envelope strike slider, and the only thing that this does is add the signal from the first filter into the mix. So here in Citrus, like the first filter is kind of like the regular, like it has the regular volume and filter envelopes that don't arpeggiate, if that makes sense. So if you enable this option, you just kind of add that into the mix. So like I made this in a way that when the arpeggiator is enabled, there's no signal from the filter 1, only filter 2. And I've done that by connecting these low band knobs into this slider. So yeah, if you enable this envelope strike, this is what it's gonna sound like. So it has like that chord strike at the beginning, versus the regular one would just be like this. So it just arpeggiates, but it's really only that both of these filters are kind of open at the same time, so they're just kind of parallel, so you can hear that first filter strike without arpeggiating. So yeah, I just thought that that could be a useful feature. Then some other changes that I made were the high pass, or I named the utility section to high pass because it just made more sense in this context. So I just kind of just slapped these fruity filters there. I mean, I could have used the filter 3 in Citrus, but I don't remember, like I thought that I would have needed it for something else later, and then I just added these, but then in the end I didn't need it, but I just kept these because it just really doesn't matter. It's just a simple high pass. And we have the sync function, which is probably the coolest thing in this patch, in my opinion. It sounds like it's very easy to make these interesting and kind of old school synth timbres by using this like sync function. And then when you disable it, it's just a frequency adjuster. And here, if you select the pulse wave, which is the last one, so this is the regular square and this is the pulse, then this pulse with modulation will also work. And that also sounds kind of cool. And in the original synth, it had that ramp LFO shape, but I just used the default menu right here in the P controller. So it has a sine and a triangle and a square, a saw, and random. So I added this button, which basically just flips the bass and the volume knobs like this. So it essentially inverses whatever like shape it has. So then when you have the saw selected, you can invert it. So you can create the ramp and the kind of regular saw. And then I kind of like to include the random option as well. I think it's kind of fun. You can probably use it to create some interesting stuff. Oh yeah, these buttons down here, I just added some effects, like something that I commonly use. This is like a saturation option, so I just have a Maximus there. And when I click this, it'll kind of switch the threshold mode. And when I adjust this one, it'll change the ceiling. And then this is the post gain. And then this white option, well, the button itself doesn't do anything, but this knob changes the reverb. But if I change it, I can add some width. I just thought that might be a useful function. And this last one doesn't do anything. So you can add, like if you want to add some effect or plugin into it, you can do it yourself. And then the glide option, it just goes from lower to higher. And if you want to change this, just go into Citrus, and in here I just have like a pitch envelope, and then the glide is just connected to the attack knob. So here you could change these to be something else, but then it's a little bit inconvenient because you have to change it in every single operator. Like if you want it to behave the same way with each waveform, but yeah. So yeah, the map once again has quite a lot of connections, but not that many plugins. There's a lot of formula controller action going on. But it's like I thought that this would have been even bigger. I haven't even really tested how CPU intensive this is. It's like, well, I have 2 instances, so it's like around 400 megabytes. I'm just gonna try to make some kind of a pattern, maybe a chord. Well, somewhere around 20% of my kind of old Ryzen CPU. I mean, I think it's gonna work pretty good. Like it kind of exceeded all of my expectations, and at one point I was kind of scared that it would be so laggy that it wouldn't even open up, but it's like pretty good. Oh, I forgot one thing, the keyboard tracking. So I also have the keyboard tracking option in the filters. So if I turn everything else down and then enable the keyboard tracking and then just put the resonance all the way up, you can play the filter. And the Arpeggiator also works for the filter. So yeah, the way that works, I have this separate patcher instance. So I have this Fruity Love filter and the envelope controller. And this works by just, like here in the envelope controller, I have the Arpeggiator function, which comes directly from this. And then I have this keyboard mapping. So I've made the shape, which basically just moves the filter to correspond to whatever key I'm pressing. So it was pretty simple, to be honest, to make this work. So now you can see when I play something, the cutoff moves, and in here you can see how it's moving. So if you ever wonder how you can make filter keyboard tracking, you can do it with the envelope controller and LUF filter, and you could use like the Citrus internal filter as well. I made this thing separately, so I just kind of slapped it in here and it worked great. So and I also have this Citrus instance here that's actually feeding just a tiny bit of noise into here. So in an analog synthesizer, there's always some background noise happening, like from the components. Like it's never completely silent. But in a digital environment, like this LUF filter doesn't just start oscillating on its own, because like there's nothing going in, so you need to put something in it in order to make it do that. Okay, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I should mention, but I don't think that there is. So yeah, I think that this project is done now. Yeah, I hope that you find this useful and you can utilize it in your songs and your productions. Yeah, I hope you liked this video. Please leave a comment, please like it, and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. I have a lot of patcher tutorials that I've just recently posted, so if you're interested in learning any of these kinds of techniques to create patches like these, you can check out those tutorials. I'm gonna put a link somewhere. And yeah, I think that's about it, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!